Right then, welcome back. Still Breakfast Central on a Wednesday with Olisa and Tolu. We're still talking about International Women's Month. Yes, indeed, after International Women's Day. And we'll continue to discuss right here as we celebrate it. Now, earlier this week, however, the entire month of March, we know is Women's History Month. Now, whether the day or the month is about documenting women's, their struggles, their stories, achievements, and progress made moving the world towards, an equitable future.
Now, for the commemoration, social media platform Facebook recently launched Lead Hers, Life Lessons from African Women. The publication shares the inspirational stories and the advice from African women in media, entertainment, politics, education, and even business. 19 women from across the continent were part of this.
Now, one of those women joins us right now on Breakfast Central, none other than Samantha Musa. She's a media personality, social media influencer, and philanthropist, and is with us live from Zimbabwe. Good morning, Samantha.
Morning, guys. How are you?
We're great. Thank you so much for joining us, Samantha. It's good to see you.
Thank you for having me. Thank you so much for having me.
So you're one of the women who contributed to the book that Facebook launched recently. But before we get into that, I have to ask, why do you think it's necessary for us to have days like International Women's Day or Women's Month and be very intentional about celebrating the struggles, the progress, the challenges, the successes that women have in their everyday lives?
I think it's so important to note that the story of women, especially African women, hasn't been told enough. And I think we're in a beautiful generation because we have been afforded a lot of platforms that can allow us to actually celebrate the story of women. And it's just important because, for the next generation to understand that we need to continuously have this conversation so that we can get to equality. And this is what we're fighting for.
Well, Sam, the world has made unprecedented advances, but no country has achieved gender, equality or equity, as you may call it. Now, we know that, legal restrictions have kept about 2.7 billion women from accessing the same choice of jobs as men. Now, less than 25% of parliamentarians were women. As of 2019, a couple of years ago, 1 in 3 women experienced gender-based violence still. Now, how do we put a stop to all this and begin changing the narrative?
To begin with, I think I'm very proud to be an African woman because contrary to public belief, Africa is actually second in terms of legislative heads globally, and then come after Europe. So we're already starting the conversation well in Africa, in as much as the world paints it as if Africa is not doing enough. That's the first part. The second part becomes, I think it's so important that we continuously have these discussions and put different people onto the table, because the minute we decide that we are not going to tap into those conversations, I think that's where we get our drawbacks as African women. So it's so important to have platforms like Facebook discussing these things because of that very fact that we're still behind in as much as we may feel like we're getting some kind of headway. And, it's important for us to begin to think differently. And from there, I think it's easier for us to now say, okay, this is how we can change the narrative because we've already started the conversation.
Okay, so let's talk about the publication by Facebook, which follows its 2020 launch of Inspiring Change Makers, Lessons from Life and Business. But the 2021 book that has you part of it, some people from Nigeria, amazing African women from across the continent. It's also brought to life through a series of beautifully illustrated artwork that you're seeing on your screens now. And that artwork was commissioned from 4 female artists from across the continent. So Samantha, tell us about your contribution to the book, a book that talks about life lessons and inspiration from African women.
So I think one of the biggest challenges that we have is that there's this perfect imagery that is created around the different lessons when they are put out in public, of which I think that the book is so rich in that there are different stories told from a point of failure, from a point of success, and all of it paints a lot of color to where we are as African women. So for me, I was really excited because my story never came from success, it came from failure. And because I come from a world where I couldn't afford to actually go to university and finish it because my parents couldn't afford to take me. But however, I managed to figure out how I could contribute in terms of media. And from there, I began my own story to tell people what you can do potentially, even without an education. But it's even better when you do have an education. But the moral of the story from my end is that I'm really appreciative, because I also got to tell my story from a point of failure. And that's what I love so much about this book, is because the different colors that are being painted from this very book.
All right, I'm looking at that image of the book. So I don't want to use the word gloss, but so catching, basically. Now, Sam, the situation for many women in Africa is still difficult, across the continent. But there are some who say, that we've made some sort of progress. Do you think that progress has been made? And if so, Sam, how?
I think I alluded to the fact that in terms of policy making, we have a lot of women who are in strategic positions in Africa. So I think that's one of the big wins that we must celebrate. We're not where we want to be, but we are in the road to getting where we should be. And I think because of this generation is very vocal. We speak a lot. I think we're in a better place because where it starts off is us having the conversation of how can we do better. Apart from that, I honestly believe that men should be included more in the conversation, because it makes no sense for us as women to just shout on the top of the roof that we need equality, and yet the men are not coming to the table. So I think that's one of the areas which we need to really focus on and make men understand why it's so important for us for them to understand why we feel disenfranchised, or why we feel that there's some level of discrimination, whether it be in the workplace, whether it be in the home, or wherever it is, and how we can actually get there. So the first part is that having those conversations, including men, not just speaking of the women, but also I think the bigger part is us educating each other. So from schools, we should have that being taught and that being instilled, empowering the boy child to know that how to deal with an empowered woman is also a part of that conversation. So I think those are the strides that we can actually take in order for us to get to where we want to get to.
Okay, and here in Nigeria, we call this generation the Sorosoke generation, which means speak up. And they're very, in some ways, violent in how they speak up, very enthusiastic about this. But Sam, this year's theme looks at women in leadership, particularly with COVID-19. But the numbers tell us that women are not adequately represented in leadership, even though the numbers have been improving. Research, however, shows us that women are great leaders, and they bring great qualities to the table, like empathy, open-mindedness, great communication skills. They focus on teamwork, and they help to make the work environment more positive. And having women in leadership positions can also lead to improvements in health, education, policies, and much more. But for many Africans, this goes against culture and tradition. So for women's equality and equity on the continent, we are constantly battling entrenched cultural and traditional beliefs. And if we're going to make progress, we have to address these head on. How do you think we should take on these issues of culture and tradition as it impedes women's progress?
I think one of the biggest things that may be controversial, but I feel has worked, is the quota system. In as much as in my own country, we're only at 30% when it comes to the legislature and women in parliament. I still think that we can do better. But quota systems, I think they actually do work very, very much, as well as having anti-discrimination laws. I think that's one of the big areas that we must actually look into and just say, okay, how can we help educate people and let them know that this is not right and this is right? And how can we do better to have an all-inclusive world? So it starts off with things like quotas, things like fighting for equal representation in places like Parliament, where policies are made in order for us to even be talking about anti-discrimination laws.
All right, Samantha, before we let you go, so we need to ask, what life lessons have you learned from African women, and which African women have inspired you?
Like I said in the beginning, I think there's so much beauty in the story of an average African woman, because everything that we are is so magical as Africans. I mean, from the mothers to the sisters who are constantly trying to make sure that, they balance everything out from a work point of view. I can name so many women, but it'll be unfair to just give a couple of names. But I think being an African woman is a super, super, super hero kind of thing, because we're dealing with so much and yet we do it so gracefully. So I think all African women are just so amazing. And in terms of my lessons, I just want to say to every single woman out there, what's the worst that can happen if you try? What is the worst that can happen if you try? And constantly always remind yourself that you are capable and you are enough and you are more than capable as an African woman.
Thank you so much, Samantha. I like the quote that they took from your section of the book, which says, "Be faithful to your happiness." And I think it's really important that we also look to make ourselves happy and to also share that happiness with others. Samantha Musa, also known as the one and only Miss Red, thank you so much for joining us on Breakfast Central today.
Thank you for having me, guys.
We will see you soon. Trust me. Have a good one. All right, I like that. Just a very nice, conversation to have. And I like the fact that as someone who's in the public eye in Zimbabwe, across the continent, she's very mindful of this and she's aware of what the situations entail for many women. And it's necessary that we have women across all spheres able to speak up and to fight these battles.
Most definitely. You want to keep it locked in this program, Breakfast Central.
Because the next battle?
Yeah. We're going to be having, it's a full month. So you'll be seeing and hearing from lots of inspirational women on this program every day, Monday to Friday, right here on News Central. A quick break we'll do, and we still got more.
Stay with us.